Please welcome to the stage Amy McReynolds and Sophia Roe.
Hi there.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for coming out today. Looking forward to having this conversation with Sophia this morning. And, we are going to touch on a lot of topics today. So if you want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask questions, be sure and use the QR code that they will share to submit your questions. And we'll be able to take those as we go throughout the conversation today. So, global food issues, right? So, Sophia, when I think about this, we talk a lot about food justice. Food justice is defined as a holistic and a structural view of the food system. And there are really three key parts to it, right? So ensuring healthy food for everyone, ensuring that there's a sustainable food system, and that there's justice for food workers. So when we think about the food justice movement, we are remedying racist, systemic oppression, the history around that in this country. Why is this conversation so important at this moment?
Okay, so the conversation's been important for a really long time. I think there's a really big focus on it now because of social media. I think we're connected in a way that we haven't always been. Food insecurity has been really important to me because I grew up very food insecure, right? I grew up a very hungry kid. For people that don't know, I grew up in foster care. And I think sometimes when we think about hunger, we think about it in this sort of like state of emergency way. Something happened, right? And now people don't have food. But I was really just like born and I didn't have food. And I knew at a pretty young age that I was food insecure. I knew I went to a friend's house, they had things, and I didn't have things. In regards to it being important now, I think people can talk about it being important now, I think people literally are seeing people on the internet say, can you do my GoFundMe? Like, I can't pay my rent today. You know what I'm saying? I could just feel like social media just has us way more in touch than ever before. And I think that is a good thing.
Yeah. And certainly the pandemic brought to light a hidden issue in this country in particular. Maybe we can take a look at some of the statistics related to food insecurity in the U.S.
Come on. There it is.
So, of course, we all learned during the pandemic, and it was true even before the pandemic. Hunger is a national crisis. Food insecurity exists in this country in every county, every parish, every borough, but it is a hidden issue. Tens of millions of people will seek food assistance this year. Last year, we had 53 million people who sought assistance from the charitable food sector. It is a complex issue, but it is completely solvable. So that's why we are here to have this conversation today. Just sharing a few more stats, right? According to USDA, 34 million people in the U.S. faced food insecurity last year. Of that, 9 million of those individuals were children, and just over 5 million were seniors. So really important to know the stats.
Really important to know the demographics, the people that are suffering. This slide is very important.
That's right. So again, as we think about issues around racism and systemic oppression in this country, African Americans, Black people, 1 in 5 face food insecurity, 1 in 5 Native people face food insecurity, and 1 in 6 Latino, compared to 1 in 15 white. So I'm just going to let that sit there for a minute. Huge disparities, and these are the disparities that we're talking about when we talk about food insecurity. Mm-hmm. And from a geographic standpoint, focusing on rural is really important. 9 out of 10 counties where there is high food insecurity in this country, the highest rates of food insecurity are in rural counties.
It's true. You know what's even more astounding is how many people who are food insecure that actually are responsible for growing our food.
That's right.
That is really, like, to me, always just like blows me away.
That's
right.
right.
People responsible for getting food on our plate are the ones suffering food insecurity.
Right, and that's why we talk about justice for food workers.
Absolutely.
And again, we talk about the systems that exist, the systems of racism that are key drivers to the disparities that we just talked about,
Yep.
right? So long-standing issues around economic investment, disinvestment in communities, poverty, unemployment, wage gap, any system that you can think of disproportionately impacts people of color in this country. So again, that's why we see the stats that we do.
This is really important to kind of start with facts and start with numbers, because if you don't have a baseline for knowledge, then you really can't be a person who understands solutions, because you don't really understand the depth of the problem. Again, these numbers are I mean, they are awakening, but these do not represent the global number, right, which is even more heartbreaking.
All right.
I actually want to talk quickly about the food desert versus food swamp. I see those terms used a lot, and I think that they're often used incorrectly. I don't live in a rural area. I live in East New York. I live in like the king, queen, whatever royal food swamp. I live in an area where you can find absolutely everything except a salad. You can find Popeyes, you can find McDonald's, you can find all of those things. So the food swamp is this idea of there's food, right, but it's probably not nutritious, right? Whereas a food desert is a place where, you see these a lot in rural communities, right, where there might not be a grocery store within a 50-mile radius or 100-mile radius. And if there is one, it's probably, what would you say, like a Walmart?
Yeah. And even in urban areas, right, thinking about folks having adequate transportation to be able to get to grocery stores, it's really important. So food deserts exist in all communities.
Absolutely. Another example in New York is like a farmer's market, right? On my Instagram, you see me at the farmer's market all the time, but I'm able to take the 3 trains necessary to get to said farmer's market, right? Unless you're able to do that, right? So it's not that the food doesn't exist. It's like a distribution problem. It's just the right people getting to the food, you know, which I guess is where Feeding America comes in. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do with Feeding America?
Absolutely. Thanks, Sophia. So Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks, 200 food banks that reach every county, parish, borough in the U.S. We work in partnership with meal programs, soup kitchens, other programs across the U.S. to be able to get people access to food. Yep. You know, when I think about food deserts and food swamps, an issue that comes up for me is the issue around health, right? So again, during the pandemic, we saw folks who were most impacted by COVID were folks who are people of color. And when we think about people who had underlying health conditions, diabetes, cardiovascular issues, a lot of that is driven by the food that they have access to or don't.
Oh my gosh, I could talk forever about this, and I'm gonna start getting rambly here in a minute, but like, just bear with me. It goes so deep. You know, the first grocery store in the US, like the Piggly Wiggly, right? Back when we still lived in a very agrarian society, you'd walk in, you'd tell the clerk what you wanted, they'd get it, right? They had a relationship with the farmer. It was great. Now, we're so out of touch, right? We don't live in an agrarian society. We have no idea where things come from, right? And also, you have to look at this idea of work, right? The powers that be, they want you working. They want you working. I don't remember anyone asking for convenient food. We didn't ask for that, right? They gave us that because they said, why do you need to learn how to cook? Why do you need to feed your family? You don't need to do that. You need to be working. We have this convenient food for you, right? So here are powders and bouillon cubes and all of these things. It's like oppression by bouillon cube, I swear. I know that sounds, but like, because before you know it, right, a thing that is actually manufactured by like a white conglomerate becomes part of the culture. A great example, adobo, sazon, very important to the Latin community, really important to the Puerto Rican community. You cannot tell them that those things are not quintessentially, like, right? You cannot tell them that they are not quintessentially part of their culture. But meanwhile, like adobo, sazon, you can make these things from scratch with the right ingredients. But if you don't have the knowledge of how to do it, right, before you know it, you're actually oppressing people by taking actual knowledge away from them, right? How to take care of yourself. I say it all the time, like the easiest way to take care of yourself, like wellness, it's all of these things and tinctures, and it's literally not. It's literally like food, air, water, movement, sunlight, purpose, community. These baseline, these really, really, really simple things. And so if at your baseline, you don't know how to like provide for yourself or feed your body, you know, of course you're gonna have these underlying conditions. Of course you're going to eat this food that you don't know where it came from, you don't know who sourced it, right? Of course you're going to eat this food, it's going to make you sick, and then you're going to feed your kids the same thing, and the cycle just continues and continues and continues, you know?
So Sophia, when we think about food deserts and food swamps, we think about health issues, do you think it's possible to ensure that there is equitable food access in the corporate food industry?
Not in the way that it's currently set up, but I do think it's possible. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm gonna get rambly again, but I think a lot of it is what land, like what land, whose land we're on, right? Acknowledging that, right? This is where it gets a little wild. I don't see people talking about this enough. My friend Alexis talks about this sometimes, but what are we growing on this land, right? Almonds is a really beautiful example. We're bringing in millions and millions of gallons of water to grow almonds. Almonds are native to Asia. They don't grow well here. That's why we have to bring so much water in. Why are we growing them? Rice actually grows great here, though. Corn, native, grows really, really great here. You know, I think when we let the consumer narrative drive what we grow, we have problems, right? Right? That's like, oh, almond milk, we got to do these huge commercialized, big mechanized, huge farms, right? So I think that's a problem. I think the other problem is this drive and desire for scalable. I don't think that it's supposed to be scalable, you know, or it's
big.
It's not supposed to be scalable. It's not supposed to be big. It's not supposed to be mechanized. It's not supposed to be replicable. We shouldn't be growing the exact same thing in Texas as we're growing in Washington, right? We need to go back to eating regionally, you know? So like, the corporate structure is not set up like that because corporate structure is set up for money, right? But if we actually want to consider people and we want to consider the planet, we have to go back to regional eating, which kind of sounds like blow up corporate food systems, but like, you know, I feel like it is so not sustainable. I mean, I think I read an article recently that says we've got maybe, our topsoil's got maybe another 55, 60 years. You know, I mean, we need to be doing everything that we can to get away from corporate everything, you know? And I mean, that goes into like how you use your dollar, but it also just goes into like education and why we grow the things that we grow, you know? Like almond milk was not a thing, and like we weren't worried and thinking about, oh my God, almond milk and oat milk and all the things in like 1980. Like we weren't doing that, you know? And so these food trends can actually change the planet and drive for change. So that's a big focus for me too, is like, challenging what is food and what isn't food, you know? Do you know what I mean? Like, we think about that corporate question. It's like 3 billion people globally eat insects. I'm not telling you need to go out and eat insects, but I'm not telling you shouldn't. They're a really great renewable resource, really great protein resource, right? You know, just questioning the things that you eat and where it comes from and the planet's impact as much as you possibly can does not fit in with the corporate business model. They are not concerned with direct trade. They don't care who grew the food. They don't care where it came from. They don't care how many trucks, carbon, distribution. They don't care.
So let's think about then, how do we reimagine what's possible? How do we reimagine leadership in order to dismantle structures that currently exist, in order to identify solutions that can be more sustainable and create opportunities for justice for food workers?
This is my favorite. Leadership is my favorite. Okay, so people say all the time, I get DMs and emails like, Sophia, what can I do? What can I do about this issue? I'm always like, you know, there are so many people that are doing it correctly. The easiest, most free thing costs no money is truly you can uplift the people that are doing things correctly. Like there are so many people, organizations that are doing things right. It costs you no money and no time to do so. But another thing that I'm always thinking of, storytelling is a really big part of what I do. I do it on Counterspace all the time, right? Is I think about philanthropy, and we talked a little bit about this in the back. And like, when you imagine the face of philanthropy, like, you close your eyes and think about it, you're probably thinking about a white person, right? Same way as if I say, who's your doctor, or who's the pilot of an airplane, you're probably thinking about a white person, or a white man, right? And Dion Dawson talked about this on your show.
You did, yes.
It's so incredible. So when you're thinking about this idea of like, I want to make a change, I want to do something, it takes a lot of time to do that, right? And when you go into a black neighborhood or a food insecure neighborhood, you might think, before saviorism, right, before you get there, you're thinking like, I'm gonna volunteer, I'm gonna help. These people, they can't help themselves. They can't do anything for themselves. And I'm like, no, they can, okay, they can. But the amount of time and energy that it takes to create a startup, to volunteer, to do any philanthropic work, to then get to know a community, equity, right? To then ask the community what they need. Let's just so we're clear, that is equity. Give this community exactly what they need. To then get everyone together in, you know, in some kind of assembly for a greater cause. Well, of course that community can't do that for themselves. They gotta go to work. They gotta go to school. They have kids. They have all of the things. So when I think reimagining leadership, right, we got to start with our own biases. I think we have to start with what leaders look like. Even like today, oh my God, I was so stressed out when I was coming here. I was like, how do I look professional? I was like, I want to look professional. And I was like, I should wear a blazer, like a blazer's professional.
I'm glad you didn't.
But I'm like, wait, who the heck created this concept or construct that like a blazer is like the thing, you know? Like I've been reporting on food insecurity for like almost 5 years, and I'm worried about like being professional. It's like the stuff that we think about, those things don't matter, you know, when it really comes down to it. So that's one thing I think about is like sort of reimagining what a leader looks like. You know, like what does a hunger advocate look like? Because we're used to a certain type of face, you know, we're used to a certain type of thing. And then imagination. I think that is something that so many people who I have met instill in me, just so much imagination, the way that they have, that some of these people, which I'm gonna talk about, have just made me completely rethink how we can make things better. Yeah. You know, whether it's like Oko Farms in Brooklyn, there's this incredible woman who decided, you know what, aquaponics in the middle of Bushwick. She's just got these big drums with fish. And well, the difference between hydroponics and aquaponics is, right, like hydroponics is growing things in water, but aquaponics is the inclusion of fish. So there's actual wildlife, so it's this complete circular system. So like, I'm gonna talk about poop for a second. So basically the fish are in there, and then their poop, it creates nutrients, right, grows the food, and it's just like this beautiful circular system, and it's just in the middle of Bushwick. Like, I don't know why it's there, right? But I want people to know about her because I want there to be 10 more Oko farms, right? Or another person I think about is Bryn Smith. He's this incredible kelp farmer. Used to be a commercial fisherman, was treated horribly, terribly, right? Lost his job, again, protecting workers like we talked about at the top. Was not protected, decided I'm gonna go into kelp farming. Seems like kelp's the future, could be good for the planet, right? He didn't have to worry about land. This is something people need to talk about. Like, we always talk about land reacquisition, right? But kelp farming, the industry as a whole is up 600%, right? It's so good for the ocean, creates entire ecosystems that else, you know, wouldn't have been there otherwise. And he decided, like, listen, I have a boat, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be this kelp farmer, you know? And we go out in the middle of the ocean, he's like, Soph, the ocean isn't privatized. You know, like yet, which is terrifying to think about. That's another talk. Like, listen, terrifying, I know. Wow, can you imagine? Ugh. Anyway, so I can just go out there. I've got my huge kelp farm, and you know, I'm using indigenous practices. That his wife is indigenous, you know, and through that, I've been able to create a whole industry for this town, right? So the idea that people aren't doing things correctly, or that there's not already incredible solutions, is just false. They just need resources, just like everything. The reason this stuff is all siloed, so it goes back to my original point, right, is that there's not a person big enough or rich enough, right, to be at the top to connect all the dots. That's why you always see foster care reform over here, right, carceral system reform over here, homelessness reform over here, addiction support over here, because there's not one person large enough in these communities because of oppression to handle all of these issues and tackle all of these issues.
Yeah. It's interesting, Sophia. I think about, you know, at Feeding America, we have a bold aspiration that we've articulated for this nation. We believe that every community and every person in it should have access to food and resources that they say they need in order to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive. And one of the great things that I've seen in my work is we have what's called a Food Security Equity Impact Fund. And so I'm seeing folks who are thinking also multi-generational solutions. So I think about Pastor Keith Davis at the Camden Dream Center, who's working in Camden, New Jersey. They have a curriculum that they call AgriSTEM, which is really about teaching kids from grades K through 12 about agricultural jobs, right? And to be able to apply STEM to agriculture. So it's a way to think about investing in youth and creating opportunities for multiple generations. I think about my hometown of Gary, Indiana, and Faith Farms that's working to do farming right there in the city of Gary, providing jobs that we talked about in a community that has an average median income of $6,000 a year. They were able to provide an opportunity for someone to work part-time for $20,000 a year. They provide jobs for kids in the summer where they're paying them $15 an hour. So again, it's creating and planting these seeds of opportunity, of innovation, and guess what? This has been going on for decades. This isn't new. No. But investing and having access to resources is key.
Absolutely. I'm going to talk about Deion Dawson because I think that he is, I keep mentioning him, but he really has really kind of blown my mind and reimagined even the way that we think about the philanthropic model when it comes to food. You know, we really love that whole donor model, right? Like someone donates food. His model is completely different. I mean, his model is, no, we buy food. We buy gorgeous brand new food and we drop it off at this location and people know, they come there, right? Like he has it like set up, right? With like SMS, like text message drop-offs.
Yes, the people get text notices. Absolutely, using technology. And for Deion, one of the most important things in the experience, Deion Chicago Dream is the name of his organization, is the dignity and the respect of the folks who are getting access to that food.
Absolutely. Yep. Like this whole idea that, and I tell people all the time when they're dropping off their food, I'm like, if you wouldn't eat it, don't drop it off at the pantry. You know what I'm saying? Like it's very, very simple. I mean, in that kind of community way, there are some things, because people do ask me, so what can I drop off at the pantry, right? Obviously not expired food. Obviously, if you want to drop off food that you cooked, you know, maybe write the ingredients. Pay what's in it, you know? Also, consider the neighborhood that you're in. Right? This idea that a community only needs flour, dried pasta. Like, no, like, drop some good stuff off there. Drop some spices, some tea, some coffee, you know, like make someone's day. And when you do it, hang out and see who the people are that are picking up the food. Get to know them, you know? And once you see them regularly, you can get a relationship going. And then before you know it, you have a new friend. And I'm sorry, once someone's your friend, don't you look after your friends? You know, we're talking about community building here, you know. I would never allow a friend of mine to go hungry, you know. But there are community members, people that are I call them potential friends that live on your very block that are probably experiencing hunger. If you look at the stats, that's almost 100% positive. I think we all want to change the world, me included. Oh my God, every day I'm like, how am I going to change the world today? But sometimes it's got to start with like changing your block or your street, you know? And so I have seen friends do everything from have bake sales to hanging out at food pantries to see who comes by and getting to know a mom who then, you know, was like, oh, well, I know a friend and she's getting out of prison, and then working with the Women's Prison Association. Like there's so many different little like webs of giving and community. And I think starting there is how you, I guess this was your last question, but starting there is how you create something equitable. You cannot be equitable if you don't know what your community needs. Like, you gotta ask. You can't just give people something that you want to give them and expect that system to be equitable. I like to say it's the same as walking up to someone's house. Like, it's like, Amy, if I walk in your house and I say, hey, Amy, I'm here to give you the house that's my house. I'm gonna decorate it just like mine, because that's what you need, right? You're gonna be like, no.
No, thank you.
Like, you know what I'm saying? You have to know what a community needs in order to help that community, you know?
Right, yep. And again, this idea of what neighbors say that they want and need to thrive is so critical.
Critical.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm curious, so many of you are here in the audience today. There are folks who are going to be watching at home as well. Sophia, when you think about what is it that individuals can actually do to make a difference, to make a change, right, to help dismantle systems and structures, what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna try not to ramble. But so many things, so many things. So I think it's important to understand mostly where your food comes from. So about 70% of the food that we have here in the US comes from somewhere else. And as a cook, it's very much a mind-blowing thing because I have been in rooms where people are like, the best chocolate comes from Zurich. The best chocolate comes from Switzerland. And I'm like, the best chocolate comes from Africa. Like, what are you saying? You know, like, it's literally so confusing. Or coffee. And people will talk about, oh, like, this is the best Ethiopian coffee, you know. But I'm like, how much was that coffee? What was it, $3.50, $4? You know, a cup of coffee should definitely cost at least $18 for every single person in the supply chain, or I like to call them value chains. Supply chain is a really disconnected term, and I feel like one way that you can know that you make a difference is to understand that the things that you buy have value. So language, right? These are value chains. These things have value to you, right? You need your coffee, you need your wine, you need olive oil, you need spices, you need all of those things, right? So they have value, so language is important. But it's understanding the stories. Like a story, I interviewed a gentleman who had been a cacao farmer for almost 30 years and had never tasted a piece of finished chocolate. So I'm gonna say it again. He'd been a cacao farmer for 30 years and never tasted a piece of finished chocolate. I, on camera with him, gave him his very first piece of finished chocolate, and he was in tears. Not because it tasted so great, but because he found out that how much it was for sale for. He was making pennies on the dollar, and he found out that there are people in America that pay $10 for a bar of chocolate, right? That is the reality of a lot of our food systems when we're talking about where we get things. So when I tell you direct trade, right, buy things that are direct trade, what I mean when I say that is that relationship is direct. There's a company called Cho, T-C-H-O. They're in San Francisco. And what they've done some really cool stuff. Instead of just getting these cacao beans from Africa, they've actually put cacao processing factories in Africa and in South America. So these people are connected to their product. So they're not just growing this product and then just like shipping it away to a roaster in Sweden, right? They're actually hands-on, creating jobs, right? They have health care, right? And then they even give them travel opportunities to come to San Francisco, right? Actually be in a flavor lab, actually become chocolatiers, actually become these people who can create flavor. You know, it's astounding.
That's reimagined for sure.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that is amazing.
Isn't it so amazing? And so when people say, what can I do? And I'm like, well, you can understand what's in your grocery store. You can understand why you should buy one thing, right? Like versus another thing. You know, like when you interview someone who tells you like they were almost kidnapped for bringing their coffee to another place, right? And I don't want it to scare people, but I just wanted to, again, it's just to just reimagine how you think about things. Like we care about this stuff, right? You know, I was saying in the back, your advocacy can't be lazy, you know? And when your advocacy starts to slip, that's no good, you know? And so you gotta be on top of your spending habits, on your buying habits. You know, what does grow regionally? Challenge yourself. Like, let me actually find out what grows in my community. My friend Alexis, Black Forager, everybody knows her. If you don't know her, come on, right? She's constantly challenging people to understand what's around, you know? Like, what's nearby? You know, like I know the quinoa. I was talking, I kind of blew your mind in the back with quinoa.
Another mind-blowing one.
I know, I don't want to break everybody's heart about quinoa, but there are a lot of people who grow quinoa that have been told that they're not allowed to eat it anymore because it's meant to be distributed, right? So you're talking about indigenous people. This is their grain in Chile. This is their native grain. And they are told through legislation that unfortunately they are not allowed to eat it because it needs to be sent here because it's money. Right? And so we're here, we're eating the quinoa, like, this is a healthy option. I'm healthy. You know, where it's like, yeah, it's healthy, but is it for me? And that's the biggest consumer responsibility. I know I'm rambling, I'm sorry, but it's just important. I'm trying to get through all this good stuff. But the consumer responsibility is to know that something might be good for people, but it's not good for you, right? So this is a crop that grows native corn, native crop, great, that's great. Native in this whole, corn is free. In domestic US, eat as much of it you want, right? Like Central America, like corn is free. But at the end of the day, some things, avocados, you know? You shouldn't be in Nova Scotia eating avocados. You shouldn't be. And that's unpopular. Globalization, but it provides money for people in Mexico, right? And trade agreement, NAFTA. People always have all these things to say. They always do. But I say, my response to that is like, all right, well, what's the question that you're asking? You caring about the planet? You caring about food insecurity? Or is it about your body and your health, right? Nature, not to get woo-woo, but nature knows what it's doing, you know? It knows where to make things happen and where not to, and it's got a replacement, you know? Like, I don't think the planet intended on avocado being like everywhere. You know?
One of the things I'm noticing as you talk about, right, no matter where in the world, including here in the US, right, we have folks who are working in our food system who don't have healthy access to food, who are the ones who are making that food available for those who might have the economic means to be able to access. So I appreciate you sharing, right, that global view of it is not only here in the US, but it is a global picture.
Absolutely,
and
so global.
And what it means for each of us to be able to educate ourselves, to really think about the impact of our dollars and what's possible. Again, how do we reimagine leadership? How do we reimagine possibility?
Of course, I mean, I think the problem is like we kind of all reach a cap, and I see it happen. It's like, okay, well, I am supporting my local farmers, right? Like I'm doing this stuff, so like I'm cooking at home, I'm doing what I can, you know, but it's like you're still not feeling the fulfillment, you know, like you're still not, and I think it's that for me, I'm like, that's my job. Right, like my job is to share the people that are doing things well, right? Because everybody has a place, you know? I think when you feel like, oh, I feel stuck, I don't know, like what can I do? It's like, oh, but look, this is this woman, what is it? Oneida Farm Preserves, a big solution I didn't get to because I really just have a lot to say, sheesh. I think another solution is agritourism. People are traveling all the time anyway. There's a way to make that correct. Right? There's a way to take travel as an industry and make it good for the planet. And agritourism, you're seeing this more than ever. You see it there's a farm called Oneida Farm Preserves, which what Oneida does is she actually, she's this Native American woman, and she has decided to open her home up almost like Airbnb style. But the whole deal is like if you come, then you have to like actually be on the farm. You actually have to work. You actually have to learn how the process goes. And her indigenous community was like, why are we sharing this like secret, beautiful like energy corn power with everyone? And she was like, because I want to control the narrative. Because I need for people to understand that this is our food, this is our land, right? We need to set the record straight. So consider agritourism. There's another place, I want to get the name. It is called Olive 41. I'm pretty sure. I wrote it somewhere. Let me see. I think that's it. Yes, Olive 41. So it is an olive farm, and they've set up same kind of deal. It's in, I don't know if it's in Napa or Sonoma, but maybe between there. They have created the same kind of business model where you come, you can stay on the farm. It's gorgeous, right? It's in wine country, but you have to actually understand and learn and work through this process, right? There's another one that's called Salute Sante, S-A-L-U-T-E, Salute Sante. They are a grapeseed operation. And you guys, as a chef, this is wild. It is the coolest thing I've ever heard of. So for people that don't know and that are in, if you're not familiar, wine. So something you can't really do with, something that's considered trash is like the seeds. right? They don't compost well. Usually, like wineries have to pay a lot of money to get like a big truck to come and take them away. They can't really do anything with them. They're considered waste, very annoying, very expensive. This company has said, you know what? We are gonna take those seeds and we're gonna make grapeseed oil. But not only do they make this grapeseed oil, give the community jobs. Like this community is literally run 100% by people that work at this grapeseed factory. It's wild. But not only do they do these grapeseed oils, they make grapeseed flour and they separate it by varietal. So Chardonnay grapeseed oil. How insane is that? Merlot grapeseed oil, Merlot grapeseed flour. And Amy, I'm telling you, the flowers are outstanding. They taste completely different. They are, I mean, it is one of my favorite examples of like imagination and revolutionary thinking. I mean, they took a major problem in an industry and actually not only made it like profitable for the workers in the community, but also just made me, as a chef, a very delicious ingredient to work with, you know? It's pretty amazing.
Well, I'm hearing stories of innovation. I'm hearing stories of community-based solutions. So lots of different ways to engage.
Yes.
And I want to just remind you all, if you have questions or thoughts that you want to bring into this conversation with Sophia and I, please don't forget to submit your questions using the QR code.
Yes.
Really important. Great conversation up here. We want to bring you all into this discussion as well. So please do that. You know, as we close out, I'm just thinking about, you know, what does the future hold? What's possible? What are the solutions that are out there? You've given us some great examples of folks that you've met in your travels, some that I've met in mine. What are some key solutions that you think can really make a difference?
So some things off rip. I think we need to understand origin stories, right? These things aren't opinions, right? We need to really understand, this is particularly in regards to the domestic US, but we need to understand the origin of this country, right? I remember having a really heartfelt conversation with Michael Twitty, and he said, you know, on our quest to get to know ourselves and get to know where we're from, we have to be ready to be confronted with maybe some things we don't like very much about ourselves, or confronted with a story or a narrative that doesn't make us feel good, right? And the reason I say that is like baseline, we gotta all be in the same place, right? Solutions are, we can't disagree with our starting point, you know? And I see that a lot. I see some people are like, no, the Bill of Rights, everyone is free, we're all equal. Like, ugh, look, we've got
to speak truth.
Right. And we have to understand, like, we can't, like, we got to live in reality. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of that has to do with our origin stories. We want our origin stories around food to be happy, because food makes us happy, right? I understand that. But we have to come to terms with a lot of them aren't. Some quick examples, right? The whole idea of like black people and fried chicken, like, oh, that stereotype, that narrative. Well, it comes from somewhere. You know, when enslaved Africans were first brought here, the only animal they were allowed to own was a guinea hen, all right? So for over 200 years, it was the only animal that a black person could own. So that narrative comes from somewhere. Another one I spoke about is a hoe cake, or sometimes called a Johnny cake. So when European colonizers first came to this country, they called corn a stodgy grain that doesn't respond well to yeast, because it doesn't. It really doesn't. That's not far off from the truth. But instead of, you know, going to indigenous communities and figuring out how best do I use corn, right? Instead of doing that, they were like, we don't care. Just we can give it to enslaved folks. And so enslaved folks were able to figure out how to use it. So they would mix it with water and, you know, whatever that they had. And you know, a hoe, like a gardening tool? So that sometimes it was the only heating element that they had. So they would heat that over a fire, and they would make that little corn griddle cake. And so that's where that term comes from. And the term Johnny cake is really funny, because that actually, when European colonizers came over, they saw that indigenous people were making them, and they asked them, what are those? And they said Shawnee cakes. But these European colonizers heard Johnny. Yeah, I know, it's like funny and like sad, but again, understanding the origin, right? You can argue with a grandma from Mississippi on what the name of the food is called. all day long, right? Like, we can do that, like, but is that really gonna make a difference? No. But for you, and when you're on your quest to combat food insecurity, knowing these stories and knowing these origins and knowing how twisted it can be at the very beginning, you can feel empowered to know that, wow, like if that happened like that, like now an entire food is called something wrong, right? Because of this, an incorrect conversation. Like, think about what I can do, In terms of actual communities, I think it's like reimagining the power that you have, I think that some people think that I don't have a lot of bandwidth, so I can't really do anything. The power of social media works. I use it. Anybody that follows me know, like, maybe I use it too much.
Not enough. Not enough.
Like, I'm like, wow, it's a lot. But also just understanding that, like, creating a community fridge, reaching out to people who are advocates. Every single year I donate 3 refrigerators a year to those that are looking to start up any kind of community pantry. Reach out to me. I'm happy to send you a fridge. It's part of my job. I'm happy to facilitate that entire experience for you. Also, the one thing I want to say is on your quest to share your advocacy work, just be mindful, make sure you get good permission from people. Sometimes I see stuff that's a little exploitative. I see people going to, hey guys, I'm out here doing this thing, and they just have all these people in their video. Make sure that the giving that you do is because you want to do it. Right? Like, the intentions are really pure. Being mindful about what you're buying, understand what single origin means, understand the difference between direct trade, fair trade. Biggest thing you can do, find out the native plants, find out the things that are native in your area, get in touch with local farmers. If you have a farm, like any kind of like farmer's market, actually get to know these people, talk to them, ask them what they're growing. They might be kind of grumpy. They're farmers. They're less than 1% of the population, but 100% of you guys eat,
That's right.
They're a lot of stress.
One of my coworkers says, know your farmers, know your food.
That's
right?
it.
Very important.
That's it. We should ask. Yeah. These questions.
We're gonna shift. You all have shared some questions with us. So there's a question about, are community teaching kitchens a valuable model to empower households with new cooking skills and nutritional knowledge, or are there more practical solutions?
I think that can be a practical solution. I have a studio in Brooklyn. The studio I need for a bunch of other things, but there is a space for me to have people in there learning what to do with their ingredients. I do like this question because it really it talks about that missing puzzle piece. Just because we give people whole food ingredients doesn't actually mean they know what to do with them. It's kind of like, do you know what I'm saying? It's like what we talked about before with that idea of like oppression by bullion. Right? It's like what somebody sent me. I love this question. Somebody sent me a message one time that was like calling me on they were like calling me out. They're like, Soph, like I get it, but I have no idea what to do with like romesco. Like I want to have fresh ingredients, but even if I got this, like I can't feed this to my kids because I don't know how to use it. This is a huge missing community link, right? And then again, this really also talks about equity, don't you think, Amy?
Absolutely. I mean, I think about so many of the food banks in the Feeding America network who work oftentimes with the extension offices that are connected to their communities, and as people might be waiting in line to pick up food, right, to be able to taste some of the ingredients are that are available that day, to know what some of the recipes are that they can make, and to go home with those ingredients and recipe cards. I've talked to several neighbors who are often surprised. I remember talking to one woman in Nebraska who's like, I love Swiss chard. I didn't grow up loving Swiss chard, but now I love Swiss chard and I know what to do with it because I've had some of that education. So it's really important.
Super important. I love this bottom question.
Yeah.
You've talked about health and eco benefits as well as global limitations of veganism. If a person is able to be vegan in the US, what is the actual impact there? I mean, here's the thing. If you're able to be a regional vegan, I think that's great, you know? I also think, I think this is hard because I did a conversation with like vegans versus hunters, and this was, there were many emotions, many emotions. All the hunters I spoke with, I interviewed were indigenous women, actually, which was pretty remarkable. They taught me so much. And it's like the verses. It's like the indigenous hunters were like, we literally never step foot in a grocery store. Everything is regional. We have no waste. We don't even know or understand anything there is about a recycle bin, right? There's no such thing as a farm without animals on it. So this idea that we kill all animals, like we don't, you know, like we have animals on our farm that we need alive. We love our chickens, whatever, you know? And then the vegans are like, yeah, but I care about the environment and I don't have access to a farm, right? And I live in a city and this is the best thing I can do, you know? And you had the farmers saying, well, yeah, but maybe there are eggs in your community and you can support them somehow. And then, you know, there were other, like, okay, maybe you actually do have a farm nearby. My wish for the future is that these two groups of people can sit down together and understand each other a little bit more, because both of them agree that factory farming is horrific and evil and disgusting. And both of them also in the end agreed that it doesn't matter how many people are vegan, and this is what breaks so many people's heart when I tell them. I don't care if every single person in the United States decided to be vegan. They're still gonna kill all those animals, and they're gonna send that food to Canada, they're gonna send it to Africa, they're still gonna do it. So it is not enough to just be vegan. It makes me so mad. I will get mad at any vegan. It's not enough to be vegan. How are you protecting land? Land legislation, animal protection. Being a vegan is very chic and it's very cool, but unless you are out actively trying to protect animals, protect land, and feed your community, it's not enough. Sorry, I had to get really...
Yeah, I felt that,
It's the fastest growing diet in the world. I'm like, okay, but what about animal protection? Because it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great question here about, right, like this idea of regional, right? So as an immigrant family, how do we balance wanting to bring our food into the U.S. when it is not considered regional food? How do we keep in mind the value chain in that process?
I think that you are a family. And I think that, for me, what I think of is Chinatowns. I think about this all the time. There's 9 total in New York. A lot of people don't know that. But Chinatowns are I think of Chinatowns, I think of these areas that are carved out, and you guys might think of them as food, right? Food related, but I think of them as protection. I think a lot of these communities live in these places and are near these places because of racism, right? Chinatowns were created because of racism. Like they literally were, you know? And these little Latin towns, or like little India, right? All of these areas, like, I think, it's really important for a group of people to feel safe, you know? And when there's a conglomerate, when there's a large majority of people or ingredients that make you feel like home or things that belong to your culture, that makes you feel safe. And I don't actually think that that is bringing about scalable damage, right? I don't think that Chinatowns in New York are creating damage like Kellogg's. You know what I mean? And this is the kind of stuff that makes me sad, because this is when consumers start to, they think it's like you get mad at yourself when you get a straw. You're like, oh my God, I forgot my metal straw. I forgot my glass straw. And it's like, guys, you gotta go higher. You know, like, don't get mad at me, get mad at the person higher than me, right? Like I and you don't have the bureaucratic, like, institutionalized power, you know, to like carry all that guilt. So like, let that go. You know, I'm reading this and I'm like, oh my God, this poor boo-boo. Like, that's just worried about like her culture and her family. I'm like, no, you gotta go bigger, like Nestle. You know, like, there are evil corporations out there that don't care about you, land. You know, I don't want to get sued, but you know, that's how I feel.
Yeah, and I also think about, like, you talk about reimagining the future, reimagining what regional food looks like, right? If you are now planting roots in a community, you are part of that region. I'm thinking about some work that we're doing in Iowa with the Food Bank of Iowa and Burundi farmers that are there in that community now. They are farming foods that they're familiar with, that are part of their important cultural heritage. They are part of that system now. So it's also about reimagining what's possible.
It's like the Guido farms in upstate New York. There's like rice farms in upstate New York that people don't know about. This is like beautiful Black African community moved in, and it was the only place where they really felt safe. And now there's like rice farms up there. So I don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up. Let's see. What are your thoughts on so much food wastage? Why can't we feed everyone when we make so much food? That's the $1,000,000 question. Because we can. There is enough food. I think that's the biggest lie, is that there's not.
Yeah, more than enough food to feed, at least in this country, for sure. And it's not about the food itself, it's the access, all the things that we just talked about during our discussion today.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say 40% of the food grown globally just goes straight into the trash for whatever reason, which means the saddest part for me is that 40% of the labor, 40% of the resources, 40% of the water, right? So 40% is like such a big number, you know? And so I think that one of the bigger things, yes, all the food, you know, all the TikToks on like ways to lower food waste. I'm thinking a little bigger than that. I think a big way to lower food waste is regional eating. And you're probably so sick of me saying that. But if you're not trucking food or bees or like all the herbicides, pesticides, you don't need all of those things if you're growing food that loves to grow in that area, right? So you're gonna completely eradicate food waste if you grow things that are happy there. And that bottom line, there's no money in that. There's literally almost no money in just growing food that grows good, because it just grows and it wants to grow, and you know. But that's what I think when I think how to combat food waste. It's really how to get people understanding what grows regionally and eating more regionally. And I'm not saying it's easy, because there's so many people's lives who would be impacted by that, right? Like tequila, huge, huge, huge industry. Huge hit industry. I'm still trying to figure out why every celebrity has a tequila company. But anyway, that's another talk for another time. But again, if we really kind of like dive into what works regionally here and what grows regionally here, we could find other solutions for the avocado that we don't eat, right? Because it comes from somewhere else, or the quinoa that we don't eat. Or we might even find that there are things here that we don't even know about that are delicious and amazing, and maybe we create a new tequila that's regional, you know, that is with a palm that is native to here, you know.
More innovation. More
innovation. That's what I think about. Like the ways to combat food waste are truly, truly, truly innovation. I see a lot of that happening in regards to fungus, which that's another talk, because I could literally talk about mushrooms for the rest of my entire life. But you're seeing that in the food space. You're seeing a lot of fungus being utilized, particularly in alternative meats and things like that. But I'm even seeing it used in materiality, in fashion, which I also kind of intersect with. Seeing purses. I mean, imagine a new car and the leather is all made with mycelium. You know, like there are people working on that technology. So there are so many cool, like future innovative things that are happening. And I guess like, when I think about food waste, I just think future. Like we need to kind of just understand that the systems that we have created that have been instilled for so long, they're why the food waste problem is so bad. You know, it's not like Susie is the problem, you know? Like, yes, there is some consumer responsibility, but it is a larger issue, you know?
It is, yeah. You know, we've talked a little, there was a question about the importance of the circular economy and fighting against food insecurity. We've talked a little bit about that. Any other thoughts you'd want to share?
No,
on that,
we
Sophia?
talked so much about that.
I guess as we close out, you know, there was a question about who is your biggest inspiration?
No, I kept seeing that there, and I'm like...
Like, how do you pick?
I mean, it's like, who's my biggest inspiration lately? Like that Dion Dawson really gets me. I just, you know, when we think about leaders in philanthropy, or when I think about leaders in philanthropy, I think about people like Dion, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't imagine like Black from the hood, you know? Like he really just gets his community and is so himself, and we need more of that, you know?
And saw a need, right? Again, Deion Dawson, Deion Chicago Dream started in the Inglewood community of Chicago.
Amazing.
That you often hear horrible things about,
Yes.
right, in terms of crime. But Deion is doing great things in Inglewood and beyond in the city of Chicago in terms of creating access,
Yes.
creating dignity, connecting community in many ways. So he's definitely an inspiration of mine as well.
Right, he's so amazing. I also think Edna Lewis is a big inspiration of mine. She, as far as I'm concerned, is who put Alice Waters on the map. And I think Alice Waters, like in an interview, like admitted that. But everyone, you know, everyone's like, Alice Waters, and I'm like, Edna. You know, I mean, that woman was so important to the farm to table movement, which I'm that era chef. I've been a chef for 14 years. I'm really in that era of that farm to table era. We've kind of gotten a lot, where it's not farm to table, is now it's like sustainable small plates, blah, blah, blah. It's all that now. Which is also, love it, natty wine and all that. But I think Edna, you know, it was her niece who would just dictate her recipes on a legal pad, you know, just really, really incredible. She lived a really long life, and so she's a really big inspiration to me. I'm also just really inspired by New York City. I know that sounds so bizarre, but there are more than 500 community gardens in the city, and a lot of people don't know that, and more than 90% of them are in these sort of underserved areas, you know? So these places that people think like, oh, they don't know how to take care of themselves, or maybe they're like bad neighborhoods, actually have some of the most beautiful community gardens that the community utilizes for food, right? Because they have to. So I'm really inspired by that. It's like the biggest city in the world, and there's like community gardens everywhere. Everywhere. It's pretty amazing.
I'm also thinking about folks like Tambourine Stevenson and Wanda. Wanda is a great organization that's focused on women and nutrition and diet, and really seeing representation in the space around nutrition and diet, and doing great work all across the globe related to that. So,
the Soulfire Farm folks. Love Soulfire Farm in upstate New York. Really great circular model. When I visited their farm, I was truly blown away. They have animals. They have shiitakes growing on logs. They have members of the community that come in there that just learn everything. Doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter where you come from. It's true. That model, not scalable, but very replicable. I think if you are looking, because I know we have to leave, but if you're looking for a, and I'm like, you guys are like, good, I'm done listening to this girl gab on. But if you are looking for a farming model that actually is replicable, there is a farm called Soulfire Farm. It is absolutely outstanding, like truly. And then, you know what, do I have my phone up here? There's another farm. The name is losing me, but I want you to know about it because it's actually a meat farm, which I know is like, you know, you guys are like, oh gosh, I don't know, Soph. But the way that they do it is actually really, really, really amazing. It's called White Oak Pastures. And there is a podcast with the founder. I want everyone to know about this man, because the way that he talks about the future of meat as a meat farmer, as someone who works in livestock, is unbelievable. I can't find his name, and I'm losing his name, but please, like, White Oak Pastures, so amazing. He's been able to do so much work for his community. Literally, this community was on the brink of bankruptcy, and then he moved his farm in there, and so many incredible jobs. But he has actually talked about how the meat industry, if done properly, is absolutely not scalable, right? And when you hear him talk about why, and talk about this idea of availability, like we can't, I guess what I want to get to, this is another talk, is like getting people to understand that everybody eating the same thing all at once is not sustainable. And the way he talks about it within meat, because meat is one of the largest sources of just like carbon emissions and just horrible stuff for the environment, hearing him talk about it makes it all make sense. And so you can feel empowered to also talk to people about it and talk to people how about this isn't scalable. It's truly amazing. White Oak Pastures. I wish I would have brought him up earlier in the discussion because I think it's so amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And the last group that I'm thinking about that continues to inspire me are our neighbors across this country who are experiencing food insecurity, who are resilient, who are thinking of ways to be able to support themselves and their families, utilizing the systems that are in place. You know, it is not easy being food insecure. You know that well.
I do.
Yeah. So just really inspired by the vision that folks have for their lives, for their children, for their communities, continues to inspire me every day.
You inspire me, Amy.
Aw, thank you, Sophia. Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Yes,
Thanks
well,
for coming.
thank you, Sophia. Thank you all for coming. And just a reminder, if you want to learn more about food insecurity in the U.S., go to feedingamerica.org. Please check out Sophia's show, Counterspace. Follow her on IG if you aren't already. Shame on you if you are not.
Oh my God,
And
it's
her
getting
YouTube
reckless lately,
channel.
so I don't know.
Absolutely. And just remember to do something different. Continue to educate yourself. What advocacy?
Use your imagination.
Yes, that's right.
Imagination. We're going to need imagination for revolutionary changes, you know?
Okay, let's go.
So.
Revolution is now.
That's it.
Let's go.
That's it. Okay,
Thank
thanks,
you all.
guys.